So what is up with sea moss and what is the actual benefits? You hear a lot of people talking about the benefits of sea moss, but what does the actual human research say? Let's take a look at that now. Sea moss is a type of seaweed, and the big difference between seaweed and sea moss is that sea moss tends to be red, while seaweed can vary in color from red to brown to green. Sea moss also contains a variety of different vitamins and minerals ranging from folate, manganese to iron and iodine and more, although keep in mind that the amounts of nutrients in sea moss will vary from how it was harvested, etc. And also keep in mind that the amounts of nutrients I'm showing you here will be more than what you're going to find in your typical sea moss supplement. Okay, so sea moss has a lot of people online saying it has almost mystical benefits, but what does the actual research say? In this paper you're looking at, 80 men and women were given either sea moss that was either stressed through living through the winter months or sea moss that was unstressed. So the men and women are given before and after questionnaires to see how their quality of life has changed after taking sea moss supplements for 3 weeks. It's reported that 80% of these people report that taking 500 milligrams of sea moss 3 times a day, 1,500 milligrams total, showed improvements in energy and strength. 35% of those people also reported improvements in feelings of fatigue as well as less exhaustion. Now, those who took the unstressed version of sea moss, they also reported improvements in strength and energy and fatigue as well. However, it was less than those people who took the stressed version of sea moss. Here's a breakdown of the reported benefits you see in people who took the stressed version and the non-stressed version of sea moss. And as you can see, about 84% of those people taking the stressed version of sea moss reported having more strength and more energy. And feel free to stop the video here and take a closer look at the percentages that I included in this table to make the data easier to understand. Now I know what you're thinking. What's the difference between stressed and unstressed version of sea moss? And in the paper, they do point out that the stressed version that existed over the winter months had higher levels of citrulline and arginine and higher antioxidant capabilities as well. Now, these results are interesting. However, I do want to point out that they gave people before and after surveys on how they felt, which is fine for some things. However, in terms of muscle strength, keep in mind there was no before and after strength measurements that were taken, so we really don't know if sea moss actually made people stronger. And another weakness of this investigation, in my view, is that there was no placebo group included in this paper, so essentially they're comparing sea moss to sea moss. I would have liked it better if another group of people took a placebo to see how they fared. Next up is this interesting paper where 78 overweight and obese men and women are given either a placebo or sea moss supplements for 12 weeks. They do before and after tests and they weigh these people and they take body fat tests, and here's what they report. Now, the first thing they say is that the exercise habits of the people taking a placebo and the sea moss did not differ. However, those people who were taking sea moss supplements seemed to have an increase in their physical activity level. In other words, it appeared that something in sea moss might be pepping people up to give them more energy to do more physical activity during the day. And while that's interesting, it's the weight loss aspect of this study that grabs some people's attention. So it's reported that the people taking sea moss supplements daily for 3 months lost significantly more weight and more body fat than those who took placebo pills. Okay, let's take a look at the before and after numbers. As you can see from this table, the people taking sea moss supplements did lose more body weight after 3 months. However, it wasn't much, and it amounted to about 2 pounds or 1 kilogram over the course of 3 months. And I'll leave that to you to decide if you think 2 pounds extra weight loss is significant or not. This same effect was also noted with waist circumference as well, where those taking sea moss supplements lost about 0.17 inches or 0.44 centimeters around their belly area. Now, that said, in full transparency, the people taking placebo pills actually gained a little bit of weight. They gained about 1.5 pounds or 0.67 kilograms over the course of 3 months. So what this means is that it seems to be weight loss is a side effect of sea moss supplements. However, the weight loss does not appear to be as great as some people are making it out to be. Now, I also want to point out in this paper, we see this same trend for fat loss as well. In this table, we see that after 3 months of taking sea moss supplements, those people lost about 1 pound or 0.48 kilograms of total body fat. Now, something else I want to call your attention to, and that is while the overall effect of fat loss didn't appear to be very much, when you look at the visceral fat and the subcutaneous fat, you see a different pattern emerging. Sea moss supplements appear to have a more dramatic effect on the loss of visceral and subcutaneous fat as well as belly fat, which is interesting and suggestive that while the total amount of fat loss may not seem like much, the amounts of visceral and subcutaneous fat and loss of belly fat might actually lead to some health benefits down the road. So bottom line to this study, it's really interesting, and I would like to see it replicated a couple more times to see if the same results are found. Now, as for sea moss side effects, remember that sea moss does contain iodine, which in theory could be a problem for people who have thyroid disorders like hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. And as proof of this, here's a report of a woman with hyperthyroidism who developed a worsening of her thyroid problems and also elevated liver enzymes after taking a supplement that contained sea moss and bladderwrack. And as further evidence that there was a connection between her health problems and the sea moss supplement, once she stopped taking the supplement, her symptoms began to resolve. And I think this is important to remember because if you go shopping for sea moss supplements, you will likely see it combined with other things like, for instance, black seeds, also called Nigella sativa, which can also impact thyroid hormone levels.